whether you do it individually or as part of an organization, this is something they will ask you on the application form. And when you get to matric, around March or April, you'll have to fill in your application forms. And then it's actually too late to go and do community service. You need to plan that in advance. So that's not the reason why you're doing it. Of course, we have much more greater reasons to do it. But I just want to go back a little bit. I want to just speak about what our religion tells us. Islam, we know, is submission to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, submission means that we follow all His commandments. And His commandments, we know, are found in the Quran, as well as in the sublime life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And all that we do, in our private life and in our public life, whatever we do in a form of ibadah, as well as whatever civic responsibilities we take on, must be only for one reason, and that is to please our Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and for no other reason. And therefore, it is very, very important that whatever we do, our intention is important, because we know that Islam, all our actions are judged by intentions. Innamal a'malu bin-niyyah. Our actions are judged by our intentions. And therefore, ikhlas in our intentions is very, very important. That whatever we do, we must first correct our intentions and make the correct intentions so that there's also barakah in what we do. We also know that Islam consists of two basic arms of service. Service to Allah, hukukullah, and hukukul ibad. Service to Allah and service to humanity. I know this may sound very basic to some of you, but I think it's important to build up this talk so that you can understand towards the end why we have an important role to play in our civic responsibilities in this country. Service to Allah is to believe in Allah and His prophets and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to perform our salah, to pay our zakah, to fast in the month of Ramadan, as well as to perform the Hajj. Now these may seem to be acts of ibadah, but every single one of them have a social element as well, and unfortunately we don't have time to go into it. And we know that in a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, Bunyanul Islam ala khamsihi. Islam is built on 5 pillars. Now, you can't have a house that's just built on pillars. You have to have rooms, you have to have a roof, you have to have windows, you have to have all the other furnishings that go into the house. And these 5 are only the pillars of Islam. And Islam is built on these pillars. And although every single one of them is something that we do to establish a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, every one of them has a social element as well. I want to now talk about service to humanity. And in these 2 verses of the Holy Quran from Surah Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. That let there arise out of you a band of people. And he's talking about us from the Ummah. A band of people, a group of people, enjoining to all that is right, forbidding what is evil. They are the ones to attain felicity. And then in a few verses later than that, Allah tells us, Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhauna 'anil munkar. Very similar type of thing. That what makes us the best of people? What makes you the best of people amongst all of mankind? It is service to humanity, enjoining what is right and forbidding what is evil. And since this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking to us, this is the fundamental reason why we get involved in civic life, to please Allah, to enjoin what is right, and to forbid what is evil. Because then these are the people that will attain felicity. So the basis of our involvement in civic life comes from the Quran and comes from Allah. We also know that in many verses of the Quran, and most of you are familiar with this, I'm sure there are many Hufaz in the audience as well. Allah tells us in this surah, and most of you are familiar with it, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمَ وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَاعُونَ. That hast thou considered who gives the lie to the moral law? Behold, it is this kind of man that pushes the orphan away, that thrusts the orphan away, and feels no urge to feed the needy. Woe then unto those praying ones. And he tells us that even those that are praying, the praying is to be seen of men, whose hearts from the prayer are remote. That means their heart is distant from the prayer. Their minds are on other things. Those who only want to be seen and praised, and withal deny all assistance to their fellow men. And in this verse, Surah Ma'un, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to fulfill our neighborly needs to the poor, the orphans, the needy, and the destitute. And he's telling us in this verse, especially in the last verse of this Quran, of this surah, that it is the small things that matter, your neighborly needs, that are very, very important. And we'll speak about this a little later in the talk. I'm trying to evolve this whole concept of civic responsibilities from the Quran. In a surah just before that, Surah 107, which is Surah Balad. What does Surah Balad mean? What does Balad mean? You all go to Islamic school, you should be learning Arabic. What does Balad mean? Sorry? Country, or it also could mean the city. So these are some of the responsibilities that we are also told of. And in this surah, in Surah Balad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us a very similar type of thing, that there are two parts that man has a choice to choose, a steep part and an easy part. And he asks us a question, what is the steep part? Can you all read this? You can't read it, okay. So he tells us, he asks us the question, what is the steep part? The steep part is the feeding of the orphan, helping the indigent. This is the difficult part, but this is the part that we all have to choose. So he tells us in the surah that it's an uphill road, but in another verse of the Quran, he tells us not only to help the orphans and the needy, but also to honor them. To honor the orphans, to honor the needy, to honor the destitute is also a very much part of our humanity, as well as very much part of our Islam. And then he asks us a rhetorical question, nor do you encourage one another to feed the poor. So throughout the Quran, and there are many other verses, we don't have time to go into all of them, there is a very, very strong social message that we need to get involved in the community, we need to involve ourselves in taking care of the needy in society, especially those of us who are fortunate. And we know that it's not only the Quran that teaches us this, but also the life of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because his life was the Quran. In fact, when his wife Aisha radiallahu anha was asked once about the character of the Prophet, she said, "Kana khuluquhul Quran." His character was the Quran. And we know that after he was given the revelation and he came out very scared from the cave of Hira, he came to his beloved wife Khadija radiallahu anha. And she told him these words, that Allah will never bring thee in disgrace, for thou unite ties of relationships, bear the burden of the weak and the destitute, honor the guests, and help people in real distress. We also know of a hadith where he tells us that if one part of your body is ill, your whole body should feel the pain. And most of you are familiar with this hadith. And then there's another hadith where he tells us that a person who faithfully manages the affairs of the widows and the needy will be on par with one who engages in jihad in the way of Allah, who performs qiyamul layl and who keeps the nafil fast. And then he tells us that one who brings up an orphan is closest to him in paradise. Then he tells us about the care of the young and the elderly in our society, that he is not one of us who does not show mercy to our little ones and respect the elderly. And there are many, many hadiths relating to avoidance of cruelty to animals and to be kind to animals. And unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into this. But I think we should also set some time aside to speak about our responsibilities to the environment and to the other creatures and ethical responsibilities that we have as Muslims. Now, a very great scholar of Islam, and how many of you have heard about Imam Ghazali? Imam Ghazali was a great jurist, he was a philosopher, he was a great Imam. And he mentioned that the maqasid of Sharia, and maqasid means the higher objectives of Sharia, is the preservation of our religion, of our belief, life, mind, offsprings, and wealth. And we need to ask ourselves that how can we maintain and advance this maqasid by our involvement in civil society, by our involvement in civic responsibilities. As Muslims in South Africa, we have a tremendous amount of religious freedom. We are part of the Rainbow Nation. We are not an external group in this country, expatriates or immigrants. We are third, fourth, fifth generation Muslims. We have a 300-year history. We are very much part of the tapestry of the society. We're very much part of South African society. We're not regarded as a minority as such, because we belong to different race groups, we belong to different ethnicities. So Muslims are very much an integral part of society. And as 1 or 2% of the population, we have made a significant contribution to South African society. We know of many Muslims, and you know all the names, Ahmed and many others, who have made a very significant contribution to freedom in this country. But there are also others that have made contributions to civil society, in politics, in economics, in education, in developmental work, in relief work, in medicine and law, and the list can go on and on and on and on. The biggest problem that I see now is that our young people are not getting involved in many of these fields and not making a significant contribution as our forefathers have made. Our forefathers built many institutions, and if you look just around Durban, many of the universities, technicons, hospitals, M.L. Sultan, R.K. Khan Hospital, many of the campuses at the university were built by our forefathers. And we need to emulate them and make a contribution to society. We are an intrinsic part of the tapestry of South African society. We have assimilated well, we have integrated into society. We're not immigrants, we're not going anywhere, we're not foreigners, we're not expatriates, we're living here, and therefore we need to make a contribution. We have a very important role in society in keeping with our religious imperatives. So it's very, very important that we get involved and we continue making these important contributions that our forefathers have made, and many people are making at this point in time as well. So what's the definition of civic responsibility? Civic responsibility is defined as responsibility of a citizen. It comprises of actions and attitudes associated with democratic governance and social participation. Citizenship means a productive, responsible, caring, and contributing member of society. So there are two types of civic responsibilities. One is a mandatory responsibility, which we all have to do, it's compulsory, and the other one is voluntary. Okay, obey the law, alhamdulillah, mashallah, excellent. Another one. Sorry? An ID book, you don't need to have an ID book if you don't want to. But okay, I suppose that's a responsibility that you have to be identified, so you need an ID book, okay? But what other civic responsibilities that are mandatory? You have to do it. If you don't do it, you end up in jail. You got to pay taxes. So you got to pay taxes. So first of all, somebody said you got to obey the law. Part of obeying the law is to pay your taxes. And what else? Just give me a few more, one more. So you got to obey the law, you got to pay taxes. In a community, now is that mandatory or is it voluntary? Voluntary. That's voluntary. We're coming to voluntary. I'm talking about mandatory, something that you have to do. Okay, I think most of you have got it right. So first of all, you got to obey the law. But to obey the law, you need to know the law. Of course, you don't have to be an advocate or a lawyer. You don't have to know every aspect of the law, but you need to know the law. Simple things. You don't steal. You don't break the speed limit. Simple things like that. You need to know the law. You need to know basic law so that you can obey the law. You pay your taxes, and we can go on about how you obey the law. And then you got to pay your taxes. So somebody got that right. You got to pay your taxes. If you don't pay taxes, then you're going to end up in jail also, and you've got to pay penalties and so on. So that's compulsory. There's two things you can't escape: taxes and taxes and death. These are two things you can't escape. Who said that? Which famous person said that? Which famous person said you can't escape taxes and death? It was Abraham Lincoln, a long time ago. Okay, anyway. And do you know it's also mandatory for you to have an education? If you don't go to school, you're actually breaking the law. Because in this country, it's compulsory for every child to go to school and to have an education. And I'm sure there are many others, but these are the three that came top of my mind: to obey the law, to pay taxes, and to get yourself a good education. So what does obey the law mean? First of all, you need to know the law. You must know the law to obey the law. And you start with very simple measures like obeying the speed limit, you pay your taxes, you do all the things that a good citizen does. You don't jaywalk, a simple thing like that. Jaywalking, do you know what's jaywalking? You all don't know what's jaywalking. So jaywalking is when you cross the streets without following a particular rule. For an example, you'll cross the street in the middle of the street, and you won't cross the street where you're supposed to cross. That's jaywalking. And it's, of course, a danger to your life first. Do you know more people in this country die as pedestrians in car accidents most people die as pedestrians in this country than occupants of cars. And that's because of jaywalking. So that's a consequence of not obeying the law. Then you've got to respect fellow road users. And of course, disobeying the law. Imagine if everybody disobeys the law, you'll have lawlessness. But I came across a very nice quotation from Malcolm X. Do you all know who's Malcolm X? Who's Malcolm X? What was his Muslim name? Who knows his Muslim name? Who was Malcolm X? Who knows about Malcolm X? Who read the autobiography of Malcolm X? It's one of the first books that I read that made me politically conscious. And I was in standard 8 when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and it was banned at that time in this country. And I managed to get a copy from overseas. And that basically changed my whole idea about politics and about race and race relations and so on. Malcolm X was a black Muslim who was a criminal. He was in prison, and he was influenced by the Nation of Islam, whose founder was Elijah Muhammad. And then, of course, he went for Hajj, and he became Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. That's his real name. And he became an Orthodox Muslim. And he's written a wonderful book, and I think every one of you should get hold of that book. It's called The Autobiography of Malcolm X. And I'm sure all the bookshops will have it. You can buy it on Amazon.com, you can buy it on Kalahari.com, and so on. But Malcolm X said something very interesting, and I can't read this very clearly here. This writing is small. But he said, be peaceful, be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone, but if somebody puts his hand on you, you send him to the cemetery. And that's the way he spoke. And I actually heard these words. I have a lot of his tapes. I used to listen to all his tapes when I was a student, and somehow we used to get them into the country. And what he was saying here is, he was talking about that if the laws are unjust in a particular country, you need to fight against those laws. Like we did when the laws were unjust in this country against people of color, when people fought against apartheid and they fought against the system. But that's not the case at the moment. At the moment, we live in a country where there's democracy, it's a constitutional democracy, we have freedom of religion to a large extent, and we live peacefully in this country. It's a place of peace, Darul Aman, it's not Darul Harb, where we are allowed to live as Muslims and practice our religion, and therefore we have to obey the law. But there are some countries in which the laws are unjust, and it's our responsibility then to fight against those unjust laws. Then the second mandatory civic responsibility we have is we have to pay taxes. If you work, you pay taxes. We call it PAYE. We also pay taxes every time we buy something. It's called VAT. And what's the VAT percentage at the moment? 15%. Still 14. From 1st of April is 15%. Obviously, it's good you're listening to the news. Okay, but we don't like paying taxes, but what do taxes do for us? So taxes go to who? Government. And what is taxes used for? It's used for hospitals, it's used to build your schools, it's used to build the roads, water, sanitation, our police force. Okay, we know this government is not doing a very good job at it. The hospitals are falling apart, I know that. The health system is falling apart, the schooling system is falling apart. But still, we've got to give them a chance. And inshallah, hopefully with the new dispensation now, many of these things will improve. But if we don't pay taxes, if we withhold our taxes, the government cannot do service delivery. The government cannot build schools for us, cannot build roads for us, cannot build hospitals for us. And that's why it's mandatory that we pay our taxes. And then, of course, education. A democracy cannot function without educated citizens. People need thinking skills. So education is not just absorbing information. It's about creating thinking skills, and that's what this is all about. We must be able to read and understand about issues that affect us, about current affairs. And education gives citizens the skills they need to join the workforce and to help the economy grow. But we don't just educate ourselves for the sake of education. We educate ourselves for the sake of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because what does He tell us about knowledge? Talabul ilmi faridatun ala kulli muslim wa muslima. The seeking of knowledge is compulsory upon every male and upon every female. Compulsory. Faridatun. You all know the word faraid, fard? He says it's compulsory. This is a hadith, a very strong hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So seeking of knowledge is very important. So education itself is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. It's a means of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we also know of another hadith, it's not a very strong hadith, that seek knowledge even if you have to go on to China. So those of you who are thinking about studying medicine in China, you're fulfilling a prophecy, a hadith of the Prophet. Try and study medicine in this country. It's probably the best place to study medicine rather than go to China. So excel in whatever you do. And that's the last thing I want to speak about in this slide, about ihsan. What is ihsan? What is ihsan? Ihsan means to be the best, to perform the best to your ability. And there's a long hadith about what ihsan also means, but we won't go into there. But whatever you do in your educational field, always try and be the best, be the top of your class. Whatever you do, even if you play sports, try and be the best in your sports. Not for the sake of competition, but that's what our religion tells us to do. And there are lots of hadiths that tells us about ihsan and about being and trying to be the best. And when you go to university and when you become a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, an engineer, always try to be your best and strive to be your best and be the top in your field. And that's how you will make a significant contribution to society. So that's the third mandatory thing which I wanted to speak about. Now let's speak about some of the voluntary things, and I've already showed the slide on this. So one of the voluntary things that we can do is to vote. And what's going on this weekend? Can't hear. What's going on this weekend? Voter registration. What does voter registration mean? And why is it important to vote? Because if good men do nothing, then evil will flourish. So it's very important that as soon as you reach voting age, we all should register to vote, because that's an important civic responsibility that we have. It is a way in which you can encourage good and forbid evil, like I showed you on a previous slide from Surah Imran. So bad officials are elected by good citizens who do not vote. So it's very important to vote. If you do not vote, then you leave it to the electorate sometimes to choose a bad leader. And if you don't vote and the wrong leaders come in, then don't complain because you didn't vote. So many people, particularly in this country, we know the many people that gave their lives, they were martyred in the cause of fighting against the evil apartheid state in this country, so that you and I can get the vote, so that you and I can choose the leaders that we want to choose. And believe me, most of you, I'm sure all of you were born after 1994. You didn't live under the apartheid system, and you didn't know how evil the apartheid system was. We had separate schools, separate cemeteries, separate hospitals. Everything was separate. It was separate development, but unequal development. So we have this privilege in this country, people that sacrifice their lives, people that spend years and years on Robben Island, people that spend years in exile, and many people that were martyred in the cause, like Imam Harun, Ahmed Timol, Hafizi, and many other non-Muslims as well, Steve Biko, who gave their lives so that you and I can have a better future in this country. And therefore, we mustn't waste our vote. Make sure that you have your ID book when you turn 16, I think. That's the age for your ID book. Or is it 18? 16. Make sure you get your ID book. Make sure you register to vote. And make sure that you exercise your responsibility to vote. So voting is very, very important. You also need to be informed when you vote about all the different parties, what their policies are, their long-term policies, their short-term policies, their local policies, their national policies, as well as the international policies. Because there are some groups in this country that support the Zionist regime in Israel, and Muslims should not be voting for that particular party. So you need to know what these parties stand for, and that's I think very, very important, that we need to become active citizens so that we can put pressure on many of these political parties to fulfill their obligations as far as service delivery is concerned. Then another voluntary civic responsibility that we can have is military duty. And I'm sure none of you have thought about this, but when we were young under the apartheid system, every single white male had to serve in the army. And I think it was a good thing, because the people that I often interact with who did this military duty, of course it was wrong of them to do it, because they were defending, or rather propping up, an evil apartheid system. But one of the things it taught these people was discipline. It made them physically strong, and it taught them fighting skills and how to handle arms and ammunitions. So if you want to join the army, if you want to join the military, it's a very, very good option. In fact, there are very few Muslims in the army in this country. We know of Muslims that serve in armies in other foreign countries. Serving in army is important. Defending our country is important. In South Africa, it's not compulsory, so we don't have draft legislation as far as recruiting in the army is concerned. You can join voluntarily, and it will train you mentally and physically. And one of the things that I noticed in many of those that served in army is that it certainly taught them discipline. Then the third aspect, the voluntary aspect, is taking part in government. So part of being a good citizen means helping our community. We need people that are willing to run for political office and serve wisely if elected. The quality of any democratic government depends on the quality of the people who serve in it. After 1994, there were many Muslims involved in the many political parties. In fact, there were some political parties which were mainly Muslim and predominantly Muslim. They didn't do very well in the elections. But there were many Muslims that served in the ANC, in the PAC, as well as the other parties. And many Muslims served in government as well. And I think it's one of the problems that we have is young people like you and me are not involved anymore. And there will come a time when there'll be very little Muslim involvement in the political parties. So it's very important that you get involved in your youth organizations, in your youth leagues, in the student movements, so that you can work your way up these political parties and make an important contribution. Because again, it is encouraging and joining right and forbidding evil. It is part of our mandate as Muslims. This slide is very busy, but it's basically telling us to be involved in the community. I now want to speak about civic engagement at the local level. How do we get involved at the local level? So how many of you know about the CPFs? What does CPF stands for? You've never heard of CPF? The areas in which you live, you don't have a CPF. Yes, it's called a Community Policing Forum. And every locality has a CPF, or Community Policing Forum. What do they do? What does a CPF do? What does a CPF do? How many of you know of people involved in a CPF? What do they do? Pardon? Yes. MashaAllah. Excellent. They prevent crime. They prevent crime. So they do patrols, they drive around the neighborhoods, and they try and make the neighborhoods safe. Now, this is a very important civic responsibility to defend our neighborhoods. We know that we live in a country that's infested with crime. Cape Town and Durban are the murder capitals of the world. Just the latest statistics was revealed this week. It was some international statistic they did. Cape Town and Durban feature on the worst, most dangerous 50 countries of the world. Cape Town and Durban feature in there. So one of the ways in which we can keep ourselves safe is to get involved in community policing forums. Obviously, I don't expect you to do it now, but when you get a bit older, get involved in these fora. Take back the neighborhoods from the criminals. Keep the neighborhood safe. This is a responsibility that we have to our communities. And this definitely helps and prevents crimes. And certainly I know from the area in which we live, where we're involved in a CPF, it certainly has made a significant impact as far as reduction of crime is concerned. Another one that's very, very close to my heart is planting of trees. Unfortunately, something that I've noticed is when Muslims moved into a neighborhood, what's the first thing they do? They chop off trees. Now, what's the biological function of trees? Oxygen. It's the oxygen. It's the lungs of the earth. And when you chop off trees, you are also taking away the risk of things like birds who live on these trees. And there are numerous hadiths which tells us that we should actually not chop off trees. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ which tells us, he who cuts a lote tree, which was a tree that grew in Arabia, without justification, Allah will send him to hellfire. It is such a grave sin to cut a tree. If the last, and this is a very, very powerful hadith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells, the Prophet ﷺ tells us in this hadith that even if you know that tomorrow is the last day on earth, if tomorrow is your last day on earth, and if you have seeds of date palms in your hand, you must plant it. Even if you know tomorrow is the last day of earth, tomorrow is the day of judgment, the earth is coming to an end. If you've got seeds of date palms in your hand, you must plant it, because in that there's reward. Whatever you harvest in this world, whatever you farm in this world, your harvest is in the year after. So even if we are at the end of time, the Prophet ﷺ tells us in this hadith, plant trees. Even if you've got date palms in your hands and you know you're going to be dying tomorrow, do it. And we know that there are hadiths that tells us that every time a bird that feeds on a plant that you've planted, you derive the blessings for that. You derive the barakah for that. And unfortunately, again, we don't have much time to go into it. So what's the next, since we're talking about plants and so on, what's the next important civic responsibility that we should be involved with? We spoke about CPF, local level. We spoke about planting trees, greening our neighborhoods, making it as beautiful as possible, beautifying it. You remember there's a hadith that Prophet told us that Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. And what do trees do? They beautify the neighborhoods. We need to beautify our neighborhoods. So what's the next civic responsibility in terms of the environment? Very important at this point in time. I've given you a clue. I heard it somewhere here. Sorry? Water. Water. What responsibilities do we have? Civic responsibilities in terms of water management. Water management. And again, here there are numerous hadiths. And we know there are verses replete in the Quran about water and about rain and about that most of mankind is water. Our origins come from water and mud. We don't have time to go into that. But in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is said to have made ablution, made a wudu, would under 1 liter of water. In fact, it was 1 glass of water, 1 mud of water. And he made ghusl with 4 handfuls of water. You can see the type of water management that was inculcated from more than 1400 years ago. And the Prophet ﷺ tells us that even if you are next to a river, use water sparingly. And then he tells us that there will be a people amongst the ummah who will transgress in the supplication and in the ablutions. In other words, they will be abusing water during the ablution. And we know that it is makruh to use excess water during ablution, to do it more than 3 times. 3 times is a maximum. You're not allowed to do it more than 3 times because of wastage of water. We live in a water-scarce environment, and everything that we do should be geared towards the management of water, so that we don't run into a situation where day 0 is approaching in Cape Town, where they're actually going to be running out of water. And that will be very, very difficult. In fact, it'll be the first city in the history of mankind, major city, which has run out of water. So water, every single thing that you do, if you're driving past a neighborhood and you see a burst pipe, make sure you phone the municipality, tell them about it, because water is being wasted. At home, if you've got taps that are running, that are leaking, make sure they're repaired so that water is not wasted. And in everything that we do, in our wudu, in our ghusl and so on, try and use water sparingly, because we live in a very water-scarce environment. South Africa is going through probably its worst drought in history. And we are given advice by the Prophet ﷺ 1400 years ago on how to save water and the importance of saving water. So which is the next civic responsibility? We spoke about CPF, we spoke about planting trees, greening the environment, greening the neighborhoods, the management of water, saving water. What next thing comes to your mind? Simple things. Think about simple things. Don't think about big things that you and I can do on a daily basis. Okay, electricity is important. I didn't mention that in my talk, but that's a good point. We went through load shedding. Using electricity is important. Finding alternative forms of electricity is important. Renewable energy. It's our responsibility to do that because we're destroying the earth with fossil fuels. But something else, something very simple that you and I can do every single day, and that we are very guilty of. When you drive around Durban, what do you see? What do you see? Litter. Litter. It's my pet hate to see litter on the roads. People litter. They don't throw things into bins. They just drop it onto the roads, littering. And you know that it is your civic responsibility from an Islamic perspective to keep your roads clean. And I'll tell you why. Because when Abu Musa radiallahu anh was sent as the governor of Basra, he was advised by Umar ibn Khattab. Which caliph in Islam was he? Second, first, third, fourth, fifth? Come. Second or third? Second. He was the second caliph of Islam. And his advice to Abu Musa radiallahu anh was, when he went, he was sent as a governor to Basra, and he went to Basra, he told his people that I have been sent by Umar ibn Khattab to teach you, 1, the book of Allah, which is the Quran, 2, the Sunnah, and 3, to clean your streets. Look at the amount of emphasis that was put into cleaning of streets. And therefore, if we follow the Sahaba, we follow the Khulafa Rashidin, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, we will keep our streets clean. We won't litter. And in fact, even if we didn't litter and we see things on the road, the street that we live in, start a campaign to clean your streets. And we know in many parts of the world they have these campaigns to clean the streets. This is an Islamic responsibility that we have. If you walk around the beachfront, if you walk around our streets, they're full of litter. It is disgusting. In most Western countries that you go, you'll find them very clean. You'll see Islam in their streets. We don't find this in Muslim countries. Muslim countries are always full of litter, which is probably the cleanest city or country in Africa. Which is the cleanest country in Africa, where the streets are absolutely clean, where the president himself goes out and joins people to clean the streets. Which country? Definitely not South Africa. Which country? Come, you all know it. It's been in the news. Rwanda. Rwanda has the cleanest streets in Africa because the president of Rwanda, I forget his name now, makes a concerted effort to go out and clean the streets with his citizens. So cleaning your streets is very important. Which is the other important civic engagement that you can get yourself involved with? Your neighbors. Very, very important that you be good to your neighbors. You need to engage with your neighbors. How many of us know who our neighbors are? How many of us have visited our neighbors? How many of us have invited our neighbors to our homes? I can tell you what we do on our street. Every year, twice a year, on our street, okay, fortunately we are cul-de-sac, so there are few people, 40 houses in the 2 cul-de-sacs on our street. Every year we have a get-together, where all the neighbors get together, bring food together, we eat together, we talk, we meet each other, so that you know the entire neighborhood in that particular street. And your neighbor is one that lives 40 houses from your house. That's the definition of a neighbor in Islam. So you need to know your neighbor, you need to get involved with your neighbors, and your neighbor's pain, your neighbor's adversity must become your pain and your adversity. You need to know what's happening with your neighbors as well. So we need to engage with our neighbors. So we spoke about getting involved in a CPF, planting trees, greening the environment, water management, saving water. One of the things I forgot to mention is that many of you will be embarking on a career, you'll be building your homes. There's 2 things that you can do to save water and electricity. You can go for renewable energy, use solar panels. And the second thing is grey water management. So some of your water can be diverted. So instead of going back into the sea, you can divert it into your garden, into your toilets, and into your pool. That's called grey water management. So there are a lot of people that are doing it. I know people in Durban who are completely off the grid. They use purely solar energy for their homes. One of them is my partner in my practice. He doesn't use any electricity from the municipality. He's got solar panels. He in fact puts electricity into the system. And he's dug wells in his home. He actually doesn't even need to get water from the municipality. And he lives in Durban North. So it can be done. Most of you are embarking on careers, and when you're building your homes and your wherever you go, think about ways of alternative energy, because this is the future of our country. So we spoke about keeping the roads clean, about engaging our neighbors. And then, of course, what else can we do as far as involvement in civic activities is concerned? Something that we spoke about in the verses of the Quran, Surah Ma'un, Surah Balad. What did we mention? About getting involved with the poor, the needy, the orphans. So we need to get involved in orphanages. I don't like old age homes because elderly people should be living with their children, not in old age homes. They shouldn't be confined to old age homes. But sometimes there are people that don't actually have any family, or the families are unable to look after them for circumstances beyond their control. There should be no old age homes in Islam or amongst Muslims. And hospitals. And I can tell you in Durban itself, there are lots of feeding schemes in hospitals. Muslim organizations, Darul Ihsan, Sanzaf, and some of the women's groups, Islamic Forum, they do feedings in hospitals almost daily. They go to the public hospitals and they feed people. And you'll be surprised that people will leave home 3, 4 in the morning. They have nothing to eat. They have no money in their pockets to buy food. They sit in the outpatients department. They're not inpatients, so they're not entitled to food. They are hungry people. They have cancer. They have HIV. They have dreaded diseases, and they have no food to eat. So these people are providing a very, very important service. Try and get involved with them. It's a very, very important responsibility that we have to fight hunger and poverty in our country. So feeding schemes as well are very, very important. There are feeding schemes that are run by numerous organizations in this country, too many to mention. Get yourself involved in these feeding schemes. They're very important. These feeding schemes and these developmental organizations that we have, charitable organizations, is the glue that keeps our society together. South Africa has alarming levels of poverty. The Gini coefficient, do you all know what the Gini coefficient is? What's the Gini coefficient? The Gini coefficient is the disparity between the rich and the poor. South Africa has one of the largest disparity in the world, together with some of the South American countries, where the gap between the rich and the poor is so big that it's actually unbelievable. How many people do we have in social grants in this country? How many? How many million? 17 million. A large chunk of our society depends on social grants. And what do you get for a social grant? 1,800 Rand a month. Many people can't live on that. So we live in a society with its alarming levels of poverty. And sooner or later, the poor will turn against the rich. And this is a prediction of all social philosophers. So it's very important that we get involved in organizations, because these organizations are the glue that keep society together, that keeps people out of the brink of starvation. Most people in this country actually live on the brink of starvation. They live on less than $1 a day, which is regarded as extreme poverty. So get involved in feeding schemes. And there are literally hundreds of organizations involved. So those are local things that you can do, that you can get involved with. As far as regional and national campaigns, get involved in voter education. You can join advocacy groups. How many of you heard of SAMNet? What does SAMNet stand for? South African? Muslim? What does NET stand for? Network. So this is an advocacy group that lobbies government, that lobbies politicians, that writes letters to newspapers. A lot of letters that you read in the newspaper are written by SAMNet people. So writing letters to the editor, getting involved in SAMNet, doing this responding to attacks on Islam, attacks on Muslims in the press. It's a very, very important civic responsibility that we have. Develop journalistic skills. Try and write for newspapers. Write letters to the editor. You will get published. It's just a matter of time. We need to join charitable organizations doing developmental work. And again, there's so many of them. Gift of the Givers, Sanzaf, Darul Ihsan, Al-Imdad, and these are just a few main ones to mention. And there are many others in your locality. There's no excuse for not getting involved. Every single locality has an organization that's doing charitable work or developmental work. We need to also join the MSA. What does MSA stand for? Now, do you all have Muslim students associations in your schools? Why? Because you go to Islamic schools. I think you should still have an MSA, because MSA still has a very important function to play. And most of us got involved in Islamic activities because of MSA. We were students on campus. I was in second year, and I was recruited into the MSA as a second-year student. And since then, my life changed completely. And then, of course, you get involved in MYM, which was a slightly more mature organization, and then you got involved in politics and so on. But we got involved because of MSA. So try and, when you go to university, get involved in your MSA. Every single campus in this country has an MSA. So there's no excuse for you not to get involved. Get involved in your MSA. Don't become passengers in organizations, become activists in organizations. The MSA in this country, the MSA that was involved pre-1994, played a very important part in the liberation struggle. We've got all the documentation to prove it. The articles that we wrote, the books that we wrote, the campaigns against the tricameral parliament and so on. This history, of course, needs to be researched and written. And therefore, the MSA has a very important role to play in your lives as well. Try and get involved in the MSA when you go to campus. In fact, when you go to campus, your MSA will have orientation weeks and orientation days and so on. Join up and get involved. They're also involved in a lot of charitable work. Join the SRC. It doesn't have to be a Muslim organization. I used to be part of the SRC at medical school. And I found that it was enriching for myself. And we were also able to influence the SRC in many of the decisions they made. It doesn't have to be only issues pertaining to Muslims, but larger society as well. So as Muslims, we need to get involved in the SRCs. And you've seen the leadership that some of the Muslims have given in the Feast for Fall movement. Many young Muslims like you and I were involved in the forefront of the Feast for Fall movement. Similarly, the MSA leadership was involved in the anti-apartheid struggle pre-1994 as well. So we all need to get involved. You need to get involved, join these organizations, join the SRC, become part of the SRC, and that's where you'll develop leadership skills. Leadership is not something that develops in a vacuum. You can't become a leader by attending seminars. Leadership comes from active participation in organizations, in grassroots activity, involved in MSAs, in MYMs, in any organization for that matter. It doesn't have to be a Muslim organization. And that's how you cultivate and you develop leadership skills, by being involved, not by being armchair critics. You cannot become a leadership by sitting at universities and learning about leadership. You have to be involved. And I'm hoping that many of these organizations will have internship for leaderships, so that you can join these organizations. And one of the big problems we have in Muslim organizations is that they have what they call a founding father syndrome, where the founding fathers of the organization stay chairmen and secretaries and trustees for life, and there's no succession plans. And one of the reasons they say is, well, young people are not interested. Well, what you need to do is to get involved and show interest in these organizations and be part of the succession plan for many of these organizations. If you look at some of these organizations, people have been there for 20, 30, 40 years. They actually have they've made a valuable contribution, but there need to be a succession plan. There need to be more, a few young people involved to come in with new ideas. Many of the social networking skills that you have, we can never have. Your Facebooks and Instagrams and Twitter and all these kind of things. You all have the skills that we don't have, and you can use it to the advantage of the Muslim community. We need to also, Muslim youth like you need to join political parties. Your student youth congresses. what do they call him now? SANCO, is it SANSCO? SANSCO, South African Student Congress Organization or something like that. But every political party has a youth wing. Try and get involved in these political parties. It's very important that we get involved, not only because we want to, protect the Muslim agenda, but to be involved in a wider society as well, to make a contribution, like I've shown you from the verses in the Quran, to enjoin right and to forbid evil, since it's a divine mandate that we've been given. We need to make an impact in society. As Muslims, we shouldn't be only on the receiving end, we should be at the giving end as well. We need to give to society, we need to impart our skills, we need to get involved, and we need to make a difference to society. We're here on this earth to make a difference, and not just to live in it, from beginning to end, and not make a significant. Let's leave the world in a better place in which we found it. So, to round off my talk, the 5 principles of Maqasid of Sharia, which is the preservation of life, of religion, of life, of mind and offspring and wealth. And of course, 2 more were added by a recent scholar, Ibn Shatibi, who's a Maqasid scholar. And he also included equality and justice. To attain these particular Maqasids or higher objectives of the Sharia, it can only come with civic responsibility. And our intention for being involved in society is only to please our Creator and nothing else. It's not for our personal gain, it's not for personal salvation, it's to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the only reason, and of course, the divine imperative that we have, where Allah tells us in this verse in the Quran, Surah Imran, which is the 3rd surah of the Quran, verse 104, that let there arise out of you a band of people enjoining all that is right and forbidding that is evil. I thank you for your time. I really admire you, young people, grade 10 and 11, sitting on a Saturday afternoon and listening to me. I really take my hat out for you. May Allah bless your efforts, give you barakah in your studies, and inshallah make you the future leaders of our society.
We must thank Doctor for that very, very, very informative presentation on civic engagement. This is the theme of this whole program also, is to see how we can get involved in community activities from grassroots level. And a very important point he made is that leadership, you can learn the theory, but you have to have the practical input as well. And for the practical part, you have to get involved in organizations. And he's given you a whole host of different alternatives, communities, whether it is in school, whether it is in universities, whether in the communities itself. Various examples he's given us, so there's no excuse for not getting involved, inshallah. We'll get involved, inshallah? Right, Jazakallah, Dr. Saf, thank you very much. Right, inshallah, we're going to go on to the 3rd habitude now, and it is called the Golden Buddha. And what I want you all to do is, I want you all to write. Don't start now, I'll tell you when to start. I want every one of you all to write your names 5 times, your full name. I want you all to write your name there on in your book 5 times, and I'm going to be timing you all to see how long it takes you all to finish. So I'll be timing how long it takes the last person to finish. Right, so as you finish, then just raise your hand and I know you finished. And I'm going to time what is the time that the last person takes. So your full name, even if it's a double barrel name, 3 names, 4 names, 5 names, write the whole thing. Right, so let's start now. Write it 5 times, one after the other, in that book of yours. Everyone's finished? Right, it took you all 3 minutes. Right. Now what I want you all to do is, don't start now.